Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Greenwood. I am the Eric and Jane Nord Family Curator of Education here at the Allen Memorial Art Museum in Oberlin at Oberlin College. And I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this webinar. The webinar, Reviving a Dead Sculpture, Art, Illness, and Conversation in the Work of Hannah Wilke. This event is part of the Allen Online series. There are new installments that are released on the first and third Thursday of the month, and we'll continue with webinars, videos, curator talks, and anything else that we can think of to engage minds and lift spirits. Find more information about this series on the newly designed website for the AMAM, and you can also look in the event section of our Facebook page, Allen Art Museum. It is my pleasure today to introduce our first speaker, Andrea Gyorody, the Ellen Johnson 33 Assistant Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Allen. Andrea has previously held positions at Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Getty Research Institute, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. She received her PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles, and an MA from Williams College. Andrea joined the Allen in 2017, and her most recent exhibition, Afterlives of the Black Atlantic, co-curated with Matthew Francis Rary, received a 2020 award for curatorial excellence from the Association of Art Museum Curators. A specialist in 20th and 21st century European and American art, Andrea has co-curated or curated exhibitions on Eva Hesse, Barbara Bloom, Juan Araujo, and Alexandra Bell, as well as on themes such as approaches to land in the Americas after 1960 and repetition as an artistic strategy. Her writing has appeared in Art Forum, Hyperallergic, and Gastronomica, and she is the founding editor of Digest, the online publication of the LA-based organization Active Cultures. Currently, she is developing exhibitions on the intersection of art and food, the resurgence modes of surrealism in contemporary art, as well as Hannah Wilke and the decay of latex-based sculptures, the topic of today's webinar. Andrea, thank you for moderating this Allen online webinar today. And with equal gratitude, thank you for all of your inspiring exhibitions and creative programming ideas.
Thank you, Jill, for the introduction and for helping to organize today's program. I'm really excited to share this research today in an essay that will be published this winter by Bard Graduate Center in an edited volume on conservation. As one final notice, I know we've given a few content warnings in our advertisements, but as one final notice for you, this talk does include nude photographs, images of bodies experiencing disease, and discussion of cancer and death. And the conversation that will follow my paper will also touch on those issues. We welcome you to share comments and questions via the Q&A box below. And if you have to sign off early, please do know that a recording of today's program will be posted on the Allen's Facebook account within the next week or so. So now I'm going to share my screen with you. And let me back up here. Pretend you're not seeing those. Okay, there we go. So without further ado, I present Resurrecting Hannah Wilke's Homage to a Large Red Lipstick. When I began my position as Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Allen in 2017, I asked my predecessor whether I should know about any objects in disrepair that might be in need of attention. She ticked off a few works, including, most intriguing to me, a latex-based sculpture by Hannah Wilke that had been unexhibitable for many years. Homage to a Large Red Lipstick, completed in 1974-75, had been acquired through a benefit auction held at Sotheby Park Burnett to fund an addition to the museum that many of you will know is the Ellen Johnson Gallery. The museum's director had solicited prominent artists, including Roy Lichtenstein, Klaus Oldenburg, Robert Rauschenberg, and Andy Warhol, to donate to the auction, knowing they would oblige because of their relationships with Oberlin art historian Ellen Johnson, whom many counted as a friend and champion. The auction raised significant funds for the edition, and works that failed to meet their reserve were transferred to the collection of the museum as gifts of the artist. Among those works was Wilke's Homage, a 54-inch long, 12-inch tall, wall-mounted sculpture constructed out of latex-based materials, which had been priced at a modest $1,000. Wilke knew Johnson through her then boyfriend, Klaus Oldenburg, who had been close friends with Johnson since the early 1960s. Here's Oldenburg and Wilke on a poster for a clock tower exhibition in 1975, and Johnson with Oldenburg during the reinstallation of his giant three-way plug. As Johnson no doubt would have recognized, the title of Wilke's work for the auction makes cheeky reference to one of Oldenburg's projects, the renegade public sculpture he erected at Yale University in 1969. Perceived as a wry commentary on the Vietnam War, Oldenburg's lipstick ascending on caterpillar tracks featured a mock military tank topped with a partially flaccid tower meant to inflate and deflate, and was pointedly installed without permission in a spot that overlooked the office of Yale's president and a prominent memorial to World War I. The sculpture remained there for 4 years, serving as a gathering place and platform for student activism, as well as a target for graffiti and a rendezvous spot for young lovers. The work degraded significantly in that time, thanks to both intentional abuse and weather, leading a group of faculty and students to lobby and fundraise for a more permanent version, which you see here, made in steel, aluminum, cast resin, and polyurethane enamel, which was eventually placed in a less prominent location on campus in 1974. That same year, Wilke began working on what would become Homage to a Large Red Lipstick, one in a series of latex-based sculptures she had been producing since around 1970. Her elusive title served several purposes. It no doubt paid homage to the original, since destroyed Lipstick Ascending on Caterpillar Tracks, and it publicly linked her to Oldenburg, for whom she also worked at the time, contributing to and documenting his projects. Here she is with Oldenburg during the installation of Giant Three-Way Plug at Oberlin in 1970, and she had come with him in part in order to photograph the work being installed. Wilke's Homage radicalized the feminizing motif of Oldenburg's monumental sculpture, substituting a form and palette inspired by flushed vaginal lips for Oldenburg's phallic lipstick, and an iconography of reproduction and proliferation for one of destruction and violence. By the time I cajoled the Allen's longtime registrar to help me find and examine Homage in storage, the work had been shelved for more than 40 years. The photograph we then had on file, regrettably in black and white, showed a wall-mounted sculpture comprised of uneven, wavy sheets in a range of tones, bound together in a long lozenge, with the sheets fanning outward like an open accordion. What we found when we opened the box in which the work is housed today was something like a deflated, almost melted version of what had once existed. Presumably for ease of storage, the sculpture had been divided into several parts and stacked, separated by sheets of glassine in a single box. The once pliable, glossy latex sheets had shrunk in size and turned rigid and brittle. The pins that once joined the sheets, allowing them to cling together on the wall in Wilke's intended shape, had migrated and dislodged. And the deep maroon that Wilke tinted the latex had become much lighter and duller. The off-gassing that emanated from the boxes signaled rotting, too, of an acerbic chemical kind. From what I could discern from the relatively sparse curatorial file for Homage, it has been effectively dead, to apply conservation's most morbid and corporeal colloquial terminology, for the majority of its time in the collection, meaning that it has never been exhibited at the museum, nor has it been made available to researchers. Wilke's sculpture has been examined by conservators twice over the last 30 years, and both reports suggest that a combination of naturally fugitive materials and poor storage strategy have contributed to the work's demise. In 1986, the examining conservator wrote, quote, "The latex material is chemically unstable and deterioration is in progress. In some areas, the latex has become hard and cracked. In other areas, it has become tacky and a number of pieces have stuck to each other. The sculpture is giving off strong odors as well. Making matters worse, the sculpture was stored folded face in 3 sections. Because of this physical deterioration, the shape of the sculpture has changed. The original arrangement of the sections of the latex has been disrupted and the lively three-dimensionality of the sculpture has been flattened, end quote. A conservator who assessed Homage in 2003 concurred, writing, "Homage to a Large Red Lipstick, although a major work by an important American artist, suffers from both chemical deterioration and improper treatment. These problems had already become critical barely 10 years after the sculpture was created. In the ensuing 17 years, the condition has only worsened. The piece is now fossilized in a shape which the artist never intended. At present, the only treatment which can be recommended is to freeze the object indefinitely, taking proper precautions to protect its surfaces. While this will not stop the deterioration, it would slow it so that at some point in the future, treatment for such a badly deteriorated latex art may be discovered," end quote. Given the demise of other latex-based works by Wilke from this moment in her career, it seems that even conscientious care might not have protected the work from inevitable decay. Wilke herself was aware of the issue, and by late 1974, had learned how to stabilize her materials. Works produced after that time have, for the most part, fared dramatically better. Despite the optimism in the second conservator's report, written 15 years ago, conservation science has not yet managed to develop solutions to fugitive materials such as latex, though a number of scientists around the world are now dedicating significant attention to non-traditional materials that became popular in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, ranging from foodstuffs to plastic and rubber. The last two, often applied as general terms to cover a range of materials, are in most cases an unstable blend of naturally derived and chemically produced compounds that react to one another over time, almost inevitably leading to structural fragility or complete failure. Museum storerooms everywhere harbor such objects, many of which have been deemed unexhibitable, if not dead, as cautious conservators, curators, registrars, and directors await scientific advances that might re-enliven them. A cure for Wilke's Homage to a Large Red Lipstick, given the extent of its deterioration, seems highly unlikely. In the meantime, it sits in the basement, visible to no one, gathering proverbial dust, while, to add insult to injury, Oldenburg's works, of which the museum owns more than 60, are regularly exhibited and used in teaching. We have one on view right now, actually. Dissatisfied with leaving Homage in obscurity after I had seen it for myself, I wondered whether Wilke's practice might have allowed for entropy, change, decay, and even death in the case of her sculptural works. Whether, in other words, some aspect of her work might justify exhibiting Homage as it is. Wilke, who died from lymphoma in 1993, cannot be consulted as standard curatorial practice today would demand, nor do we have evidence that she considered this particular proposition while she was still alive. But what I found in looking closely at Wilke's wide-ranging oeuvre, extensive correspondence, and published interviews is that she not only allowed for decay, but explicitly, radically embraced it. In what follows, I contend that Homage in its current state resonates with powerful aspects of Wilke's body of work. Her sustained emphases on gesture and ephemerality, the alignment between her physical self and the work she produced, and her commitment to representing the female body in its idealized and less than ideal forms, in health and in abject sickness. I make the case that Homage ought to be displayed as it is, a curatorial decision that assumes a more generous and expansive understanding of what it means to preserve and care for works of art. From the beginning of Wilke's career in the early 1960s, she was producing small sculptures out of folded clay that resembled female genitalia. She understood her gestural practice as a response to the cold geometry of male-dominated minimalism, and continued to develop approaches to vaginal imagery over the course of the 1960s and 70s. She experimented with a host of materials, including Play-Doh, eraser heads, bacon, that might be my favorite, dryer lint, and most famously, Technicolor chewing gum, manipulating ephemeral domestic goods into simple, lush folds similar to those she continued to explore in clay. She also turned, around 1970, to a pourable latex-based product that she used to coat clay or twine, which gave the material a wet look that mimicked genitalia in a state of arousal. Wanting to push the fleshiness of the work even further, she came to employ liquid latex without a substrate to create large-scale wall-mounted sculptures comprised of petals strung together in loose rosettes. Some of the earliest examples have a steeply draped, long and narrow form, almost literal in their reference to labia, as in of radishes and flowers, with its rose-hued, skin-like sheets of latex. Over time, Wilke began making smaller petals and arranging them horizontally or vertically into compact flowers or lozenge-shaped accordions. Here's another example of works from around that time. In several works, including Ponderosa No. 1, Wilke femmed the modernist grid, arranging her rosettes into neat rows or diamonds, merging a Baroque inclination toward flowers and excess with an order and discipline matched by the rubbery S&M quality of the material. Wilke created each petal for her sculptures by using a cup or the bucket itself to pour a thin layer of tinted liquid latex, which she likened to pancake batter, onto a custom-made 17-foot plaster of Paris board on the floor of her studio. Wilke's plaster floor sucked excess moisture from the latex as it dried, arresting the movement of the liquid, in her words, and allowing her to peel off and manipulate the sheets after a day of drying. A photograph taken in the studio shows Wilke arranging fresh petals on the wall. It is one of only a few documents that offer a sense of just how pliable and naturally unstructured the latex sheets were just after they had been made, a quality they lost quickly thereafter. Using the plaster floor as a pouring and drying surface resulted in different finishes on each side of the sheet, one slick and glossy and the other matte, as you can see here, creating a variety of textures and responses to light in the final work, which featured an interplay of reflection and absorption. Wilke fastened the sheets together with visible metal snaps, doubling the tension between instability and arrest in the production process and giving it erotic charge. She once remarked in an interview, "When I developed my latex hangings, I decided to use metal snaps to hold the folds together, but also to combine toughness and softness. I like the shiny, gritty nastiness and the fact that the snaps make the structure possible as well as vulnerable. You want to unsnap the piece, but that would destroy the shape." Writing much later, critic Nancy Princenthal has likened the snaps to the hardware fastenings used in bras and garters, and she has also noted that according to Wilke, the wave-like structure of the latex works was symbolically related to the experience of orgasm. Given the role of latex in the manufacture of condoms, other prophylactics such as diaphragms and sex toys, the link between latex and sex was fairly evident. Indeed, all of these allusions come together in a letter to women artists Wilke wrote in 1975, offering a summary of her artistic position that included, quote, delicate definitions of her various projects. She refers to terracotta as the tragedy of multiple romances, while she tellingly calls latex rubber, quote, the loose arrangements of love vulnerably exposed. Though the sensual pliability of the latex works dissipated quickly, the snaps engendered a tentativeness in perpetuity, allowing the liquidity of the process to linger in the work despite its eventual hardening. By the time Wilke had written that statement to women artists, she understood that vulnerability was an even more integral quality of these works than she had perhaps initially anticipated. The liquid rubber product she first used, which was then a relatively new material marketed to artists, turned brittle once dry, crazing, cracking, and hardening in place to the extent that the work practically disintegrated. Wilke witnessed such chemical changes in her studio, but did not want to give up altogether on latex, which otherwise offered so much, without first pursuing possible solutions. According to a number of letters in the Hannah Wilke Collection and Archive in Los Angeles, dated between February 1973 and November 1974, she exchanged correspondence with 4 different suppliers with the hope that one of their scientists might have a suggestion for a more durable product to meet her needs. As she put it in a succinct letter to General Latex in September 1973, quote, since I have only used this material for approximately 3 years, I became aware that the rubber disintegrates. Therefore, the work I have made and sold is quickly falling apart. Without more comprehensive notes, it is impossible to determine exactly which products Wilke tried and when, but the archived correspondence confirms that she auditioned several kinds of rubber blended with other lattices or treated with stabilizers intended to slow aging. The lack of correspondence relating to material instability after November 1974 suggests that Wilke had either found a satisfactory solution or that, following her latex installations of 1975, she had begun to move on. She had, in fact, taken up performative photographic work that would eventually vie with sculpture as her primary medium, though the two, in Wilke's hands, shared much in common. Her experiments with skin-like latex and her photographs are linked, I argue, by an embrace of vulnerability and uncertainty alongside an obsession with the body in all of its precariousness. As Wilke worked through the material issues she was facing in her experiments with latex, she infused her practice with vulnerability in a radically different way, by aligning her own body, sometimes half or fully nude, with her sculptural work, resulting in photographic self-portraits that emerged from performances. Her installation, SOS Starification Object Series, an adult game of mastication, part of which you see here, includes her well-known series of performalist self-portraits. Created during the same window of time, between 1974 and 75, as latex works such as Homage to a Large Red Lipstick. The series of 28 photographs, shot by commercial photographer Les Wollum under Wilke's direction, shows her nude, her body decorated, scarified or starified in her words, with tiny folded objects made from chewed gum. At a distance, they look as though they might be undesired growths, little boils interrupting smooth, perfect skin on a lithe, sensual body, but they reveal themselves to be, like Wilke's sculptures in clay, miniature versions of female genitalia, each of their simple curving folds meant to mimic the labia majora. They are the sign of biological womanhood multiplied, like an infectious disease, marking Wilke outwardly with that which is usually hidden from view. The photographs are defiant, even confrontational, designed to seduce at the same time that they attempt to repel. Wilke was also photographed posing nude with her latex works, most memorably in a 1976 photograph that she had intended to publish in Art News, showing her bare from the waist up, posing in hip-hugging jeans in front of two latex installations from her Ponderosa series. The magazine rejected the photograph and published a clothed version instead, prompting Wilke to title the half-nude image Art News Revised. Wilke's alignment of her body with her work was symbolic, part of the artistic identity she was actively constructing, but it also happened to be true to her actual process. As a number of unpublished photographs in the Wilke collection and archive demonstrate, she often worked in states of undress in her studio, molding clay naked on a stool or pouring latex onto her plaster floor wearing nothing but a respirator. A staged series of photos, taken from above, shows Wilke lying supine on the same floor, seductively angling her body toward the camera, while yet another group of images captures Wilke posing unabashedly in front of one of her steeply draped latex works, sitting on a makeshift throne. Though there were critics who objected to what they saw as Wilke's exploitation of her own sexuality to advance her artistic career, for Wilke, beauty went hand in hand with disfiguration and attraction with repulsion, as the SOS series makes clear. The statement she wrote for a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1976 summarizes the attitude she adopted. Quote, "Since 1960, I have been concerned with the creation of a formal imagery that is specifically female, a new language that fuses mind and body into erotic objects that are nameable and at the same time quite abstract. Its content has always related to my own body and feelings, reflecting pleasure as well as pain, the ambiguity and complexity of emotions. Human gestures, multi-layered metaphysical symbols below the gut level translated into an art close to laughter, making love, shaking hands, chewing gum into androgynous objects, rearranging the touch of sensuality with a residual magic made from laundry lint, or latex loosely laid out like love vulnerably exposed, continually exposing myself to whatever situation occurs, gamboling as well as gambling." Wilke's openness to whatever situation occurs turned out to have a profound and unexpected consequence. Unlike the other feminist artists of her time, most of whom stopped featuring their own naked bodies in their work when those bodies began bearing the signs of age, Wilke chose to photograph her own body at its absolute weakest, in the wake of her diagnosis with lymphoma in 1987. With the help of her partner, Wilke documented her struggle with cancer and the changes wrought by chemotherapy and surgery up until her death in 1993, culminating in a body of work titled Intravenous, These are just 3 of many more photographs. The photographs, while often good-humored and even funny, are difficult to look at and also difficult to look away from. Wilke did not shy from being photographed with bandages and medical equipment exposed, balding and bald, gaunt, sickly, and bloated from her treatment. Many of the images show her in the nude, but a number also capture her bundled in blankets, robes, and hospital-issue gowns, swaddled to stay as warm and comfortable as disease allows. Though she cannot help but look weary, Wilke is fearless, staring into the camera with the same defiant mixture of confidence and vulnerability that she brought to her earlier self-portraits. Unknowingly, Wilke had prepared herself to wryly document her own bodily deterioration through the photographs she had made of her mother, Selma Butter, between 1978 and 1982, when cancer was ravaging her body, a body to which Wilke was, in so many ways, intimately connected. These photographs are also hard to confront, perhaps all the more so because some pair images of Wilke's still healthy body, full of vitality, with images of her dying mother reduced to skin and bones. The well-known diptych Portrait of the Artist with Her Mother, Selma Butter, shows Wilke on the left, naked from the chest up, nonchalantly lying on the floor and looking up at the camera, her chest dotted with abstracted scraps of metal and other household doodads, examples of ray guns that Wilke collected for Oldenburg, that also recall the mini labia of the SOS self-portraits. She wears a bit too much rouge and opal eyeshadow, looking even younger than her age. Her mother on the right is seen from the waist up, her chest sagging. She has had a radical mastectomy, a scarred and scaly patch of skin occupying the spot where her left breast had been. She has closed her eyes against the harsh lighting of the camera's flash, or of the hospital room, her head angled slightly downward while her shoulders hunch upward, in a protective, pained posture. The 2 images are impossible to reconcile. They are not quite before and after, but they suggest the 2 poles of health and sickness, youth and age, and the cycle of life that inevitably forces children to witness their parents' deaths and face their own mortality, perhaps for the first time. There is no doubt that Wilke's drive to document her mother's struggle with cancer, as well as her own, grew from an intense desire to remain productive and ultimately to survive. She could not have known when she started photographing her mother or herself that both of them would eventually succumb to cancer. Regardless, the images themselves speak to the body's inevitable decay and demise, and to an interest in ephemerality that Wilke had expressed even earlier. In 1978, the same year she began photographing her mother, when asked about her work in clay, Wilke said, "These things aren't really about forever. I wanted to do a videotape where I melt all these ceramics down again just by putting them in water. They'll go back into the earth again and turn into mud." In 1975, the same year Wilke finished Homage to a Large Red Lipstick, she mused, "One strength of American art right now is that we're involved with a culture that's about destructiveness. Some of the best art has a planned obsolescence." The notion of planned obsolescence also makes an appearance in her letters to latex suppliers in the early 1970s. Though she was eagerly inquiring about a chemical solution to the material's instability, she nonetheless admitted an awareness of the work's limitations. In a letter to General Latex and Chemical Corporation from 1973, she writes, "I realized that complete permanency might be impossible to achieve, but I would be quite satisfied with being able to give a 10 to 20-year guarantee on the sculpture, more if possible." This radical acceptance of impermanence, her openness to whatever happens, to work that might cease to exist, to a notion of art that is not necessarily about forever, was not simply the price Wilke paid for working with fugitive new materials. It is instead one of the key features of her work, from her terracotta and latex sculptures to her photographs of cancer-stricken bodies. The critical question, which was never posed to Wilke in her lifetime, now comes into focus. When the work exceeds its 10 to 20-year guarantee and ceases to look and function as it once did, what should be done with it? This is precisely the conundrum presented by Homage to a Large Red Lipstick, which can continue to sit in storage, be destroyed, or go on view with or without some level of conservation. Museum convention dictates that we curators, conservators, and registrars must act as custodians of the works in our collections, and we are duty-bound to try to preserve artworks for posterity, even when that is not in fact the intention of the artists who made them. Many institutions would claim to be merely exercising caution in harboring but never exhibiting a work like Homage. But it seems to me that to keep such a work indefinitely in storage is to impoverish it even further. While the work is no longer in the form that Wilke originally intended, it now speaks much more clearly and forcefully to the poetics of her body of work, to her deeply felt affinity for the gesture, arrested in time and space by the work of art, and for its eventual decay. To come to terms with Homage and other works like it, we need a new understanding of what it means to preserve a work of art, how, why, and for whom we preserve it. Although museums have now had 40 to 50 years to come to terms with the radical re-envisioning of the object proposed by so many artists working in the post-war period, they continue to struggle to honor that acceptance of ephemerality and entropy. Such values fly in the face of museum practices and norms, many of which are rooted in the relatively conservative tradition of connoisseurship, which is bound up with the equally conservative notion of artistic intention. While art historians have in many ways retreated from the notion of intentionality and embraced a deconstructive approach to meaning, intention remains central to the practice of conservation, and as a result, pertains in conversations about treatment and display to a degree that some might find surprising. Many curators and conservators alike would find it irresponsible and even distasteful to display a work believed to diverge significantly from its original appearance and thus from its intended meaning, which it is assumed derives from that appearance. Of course, it is true that works of art can and do invite potentially divergent interpretations depending on how they look and how they are displayed, giving curators every justification for exercising discretion when making choices that might alter a work's projected meanings. But we run into trouble when appearance and intention have a less straightforward relationship, when, as in the case of works using non-traditional ephemeral materials, artworks decline quickly and simply cannot be rehabilitated to their original condition. As living, breathing entities, such works take on a historicity that necessarily changes, or at least adds to, the meanings they produced when they were first made. The fact that the object is irrevocably aging becomes part and parcel of the work's overall meaning and significance. Sometimes that decay is distracting, and at other times, I would argue it is paradoxically illuminating. In the case of Wilke's homage to a large red lipstick, we find a profound consonance between the sculpture's rapid decline and its place in an oeuvre that was increasingly focused on the body and its vulnerabilities. To borrow a phrase from curator Anne Temkin, homage in its present condition is, however improbably, the state of the work of the art that is right for itself. And as such, it deserves to be seen, to be enlivened, even if it cannot be made whole again. Thank you. I'm gonna pop myself back in, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can welcome my fellow panelists. Hello. I'm now pleased to welcome to the conversation Marsie Scharlatt and Heather Galloway. And I'll give Marsie just a second to pop up. There she is. Marsie Scharlatt, who is Hannah Wilke's sister, has managed Wilke's legacy for nearly 3 decades now and serves as trustee and director of the Wilke Collection and Archive in Los Angeles. Trained as a psychotherapist, she is also an accomplished playwright, dramaturg, and poet. And I have to say on a personal note that I am immensely grateful to Marsie for joining us today, and also for all of the assistance that she and her son Andrew have provided to my ongoing project. Thank you, Marsie.
Thank you, Andrew.
I would also like to welcome conservator Heather Galloway, principal conservator of the Cleveland-based firm Galloway Art Conservation. Heather has over 25 years experience and has worked previously at the National Gallery of Art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Cleveland Museum of Art, and for many years at ICA Art Conservation. She has also worked very closely with the Allen and treated quite a number of objects in our collection. So it's my pleasure to also welcome you, Heather.
Thank you.
So I am going to start with some of my own questions for both of you, and then I will take a look at questions that are coming in through the Q&A box below. Folks should feel free to jump in whenever they want with questions, and I will bring them into the fold as we move along. So I wanted to start with you, Marsie, because I'm curious to know what recollections you have of Hannah making her latex works, and particularly in that period of the early 1970s.
First, I want to thank you for really a wonderful presentation. It was terrific seeing everything on a screen rather than just reading it on a manuscript, and hearing your voice. Thank you for that. You know, I had already moved to California when Hannah started making the latex in New York, but I had many conversations with her about it, telling me what she was doing and how she felt she had discovered something new and was innovating something new. I remember she was very excited when she first showed the work at the Newark Art Museum and also at Kunsthaus Hamburg in Germany. She went there, and it was a very exciting trip for her. It was the first time some of the latex pieces were shown. What else do I remember? Oh, when she created her special plaster floor, she bought her loft in 1974 and was really excited about having this large floor. I think in one of the early pictures you showed, there was kind of a cardboard looking structure. It wasn't very large, but then when you see the difference in the large plaster floor and how much it helped her make larger works. And that was very exciting to her, and she was very happy about that. Let's see. Oh, the other thing I remember her talking about was getting an actual commission from Carl Solway in Cincinnati, Michael Solway's father, for her Ponderosa #1, which you showed. That was quite an event for her. And I also remember her telling me when the new owner, called Carl and told her that the work had fallen apart. And
yeah, I think folks will enjoy knowing that Ponderosa 1, which is now in the collection of the Williams College Museum of Art, was originally for the headquarters of the Ponderosa Corporation, which owned steakhouses. And the work did indeed fall apart. There are photographs and documents in the archive where, you know, they were kind of desperate because it had turned into kind of like string Swiss cheese on the wall, and some of it had fallen off, and it was really quite a disaster. So Hannah then went and reconstructed it herself for them rather than trying to fix what was already there.
Right, and I wish she was here to do the same to red lipstick. It's very sad to look at it, for me to look at it in its current condition. We'll get back to that.
We will definitely get back to that. So on that note, Heather, I'm curious to know from you, I know you're trained primarily as a paintings conservator, but you also conserve many other things. I'm curious to know if you have worked with works of latex in the past and what you can tell us just generally about the conservation of latex and rubber.
Yeah, so as an artist, I actually started out as a sculptor. So when I moved into conservation, I landed in paintings conservation, but I always kept a foot in modern and contemporary. When I moved to Oberlin with my husband, Professor Eric Ingalls, Richard Spear and Athena Taka were in the process of leaving Oberlin, former members of the art department, and Richard gave to me a Robert Rome piece from 1970 made out of latex. And he gave it to us because I was a conservator and he felt that it couldn't be supported otherwise. I actually have my Robert Rome piece nearby. So just for a second, give you an idea. Latex does discolor tremendously. It's yellowed, it wrinkles, it starts to contract. It also, I mean, you can see it still has quite a bit of structural integrity, but visually it goes through a tremendous alteration. I have my experience in treating latex has been on this Robert Rome piece, in which I have surface cleaned it. You know, they are pieces that undergo a process of oxidation and change, which really can't be arrested. Most things oxidize, everything oxidizes, but these materials oxidize actually quite rapidly. They're actually naturally based. It comes from trees. So you know, it's one of those things, and this is an important conversation to have. There is regret, like Marsie feels a certain sort of regret and a poignancy for seeing these pieces as they are now. But then, as you as a curator know, there's a regret in something that doesn't see the light of day. So there's a lot that we have to come to terms with and unpack there. A lot of it's about our own aging and our own feelings. So it's very human. It's a very human material in that sort of way. When you touch it and when you sort of try to clean the surface of it, it gives a little bit. So most people experience sort of latex glove. They know about latex gloves, but the casts are thicker. So there's a springiness to it in its youth. And even this Robert Rome still has a lot of springiness to it.
Well, that's good to know. And it is very, you know, when you touch these objects, there is like a fleshy quality, even now, even when they're hard, it does feel like that, you know, kind of like the skin on your heel when it hardens, like it has that same, yeah, I guess springiness is a good way to put it.
And each piece is going to age differently. The Rome that I picked up is actually probably percentage-wise more latex than Hannah's pieces, which had quite a bit of pigmentation in it. And so that hides some of the discoloration. So a lot of the materials that artists have always traditionally used, even oil paint, the media that holds everything together does discolor. So does linseed oil, it discolors. So latex quite rapidly though.
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't say this as a sort of a caveat in the paper, but I do in the published version, which is that we use the word latex, but there's not like pure latex that we're talking about. It's, you know, all kinds of different things combined. Different artists use different formulas. Hannah used different formulas across the span of her work. So it's not like we're talking about one object or one material that we can pin down. We're talking about lots of different things, right?
Right. Yeah, you are. There's a lot of components that we may not know in it. There's sometimes some post, so it's extracted from a tree, the latex. It's also sometimes called natural rubber. And of course, the vulcanization process, close by to us in Akron with the introduction of sulfur, makes it hard and makes it into those tires that we know about. So there is a whole range, and there are also synthetic rubbers. Mm-hmm. So we tend to probably think as humans as organic and chemical, but these polymers are all related to each other. And latex has actually been around for an extremely long time, and it was used by indigenous cultures to waterproof things. Mm-hmm. So it was new in an artistic practice, and a lot of people were experimenting at the same time as they were introducing acrylic paints, acrylic emulsion paints. So.
Exactly. Thank you. Marsie, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the current state of the other latex works by Hannah that are still in existence. Some no longer exist. You know, a whole bunch are in collections, and I know that you will have seen some in recent years. And I've seen one at MoCA in LA that was, you know, I mean, you can tell that it's a bit hard. It doesn't have like that same appearance of flexibility in the one photo that I showed from Hannah's studio. But of the ones that you've seen, can you talk about how they look now?
Sure. I first actually saw them in 1976 at Margot Levin Gallery when Hannah had an exhibition there. Ponderosa 4 and 3, I guess. The ones she showed in Art News Revised, plus smaller ones that are horizontal, similar to red lipstick. And they were very full and fluffy, and they just seemed opening, you know, all the time. Mm-hmm. And the colors were very lovely. They were pale, pastel colors, pink, yellow, and white. But they had an effusiveness, is the only word I can think of at the moment, which they didn't quite have when we received them in 1999, when after Hannah died and her estate was distributed. The Ponderosa was kind of packed in a very large carton with tissue paper, but when we took the tissue paper off and saw the little rosettes, they aren't that little, but the rosettes, they seemed to have shrunken somewhat, although the color was still there. And when they were removed to hang, for instance, at MoCA in the wax show, they also seemed a bit shrunken and more dry and not as full and fluffy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how, if you go to MoMA where they are now, that's if they were hung at MoMA, that's how you would find them. Trying to think what other, then there's other works like you showed a slide of Melancholy Mama, which is a black, that, I hadn't seen that when Hannah was alive. But it seemed very substantial, perhaps because the petals were thicker, or they looked thicker to me. And it seemed like it hadn't shrunk, although I can't be sure. The color was very strong and is strong. It's in a private collection here in Los Angeles. It seemed in really good condition.
So that's interesting, Marcie, that you would say that. When I was reading about rubber and just sort of reviewing, one of the things they said is that carbon black, which is put into tires, helps stabilize the material as well. So there could be pigment interactions that helped, and that's always the problem. It's hard to generalize sometimes, like latex degrades quickly, certain colors fade fast, but there are always exceptions, and there are always things, and that's sort of the hope that you hold out there. There are these bright spots where something like that makes it through and reminds us that it's still there.
Several of them made it through. Pink Champagne, for one, which is similar in shape to Red Lipstick, Rosebud. What I wondered about, and we could talk more about this, is why were the folds on pink on Red Lipstick all separated? When we received Pink Champagne, for instance, it was intact. It wasn't in pieces. And do you have any idea how that occurred or why it occurred?
No, I mean,
I think it would naturally happen. I think someone would have to have unsnapped it, as it were.
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell from the work itself, because when I've examined it myself and with our registrar, I was trying not to manhandle it very much, obviously, because it's so brittle in parts that you really can't maneuver it very much. But it's a little hard to tell whether it was structurally put together, except for on the wall. Does that make sense? I think
well, the ones I've seen were packed and very carefully together.
Yeah.
During Hannah's lifetime.
That's
so
what
I don't know if she would have done that. But go ahead.
It's what should have happened with this work, for sure. Nobody who worked here at the time that work was acquired is still here. So there's not anybody that I can ask directly if they remember why the work was packed up in that way. Obviously, it was done without knowledge that it was going to harden in quite the way that it did. But yeah, I don't know. I can only say that it's been like that, as far as I know, for a very long time.
Yeah.
Could it be possible, since a lot of artists, including Hessa in her latex pieces, because this is very horizontally long format, and artists were pretty structurally aware at times, and sometimes they would produce the pieces in components. Mm-hmm. So when it's installed, it appears to be one piece, and I speculate that the piece was probably installed in 3 sections to look like one complete work, and that's...
I doubt it. From the ones we've seen, Rosebud is probably longer than Red Lipstick, and I've never seen it separated. It's always been... the other thing Hannah did, I don't know if this is true of Red Lipstick, she would sometimes put a backing board on some of the horizontal latex pieces so that they could easily be hung on the wall. And I think that may have also stabilized them and kept them together in some way.
Yeah, well, that corresponds with the one version. It's almost like a really mini homage to a large red lipstick that was at Solway Gallery that I saw when I was there now a few years ago. That's on a backing board. So it's hardened in place, but it still has the shape that she had wanted because it was to this board. So you obviously couldn't remove it, and the board is now aesthetically part of the work. But it does keep it intact.
In fact, when Paul Schimmel showed it at Hauser Wirth for an exhibition, Revolutions, what is it?
Okay.
Evolution in the Making.
Yeah, he was very lovely to provide a new backing board for one that didn't have one. That was terrific that he did that.
Yeah, this is something that as I start expanding this project, I really want to do a survey of all of the other objects that there are, which I've done little bits and pieces, but I don't have a full accounting of where they are, whether they have a backing board, if we can tell structurally how they were constituted, which I think is really interesting. So there's a lot more to be done on that. But I do want to talk about, and bring in some audience questions too that have been posted, about what the options are really when a work is as it is now. And I'm curious, Heather, in working with other institutions, when there's been maybe not an object precisely like this one, but something that is similarly decayed, we literally don't have the technology to resuscitate it to its original form. What are the options in your mind as a conservator?
So it's, I guess, a little bit akin to hospice care. I feel that for conservators, there's always a sense that our primary goal is preservation, but we see so many altered objects in our lives and on our benches that I would like to think, although it's not always the case, that a lot of us are quite accepting of change and alteration. You have to sort of think about how to display it gently, and your experience of these other pieces, both of you, Andrea and Marsie, of being on a support that can help with the installation of the piece. I would imagine for a piece like this, it may not be able to go fully upright and support its weight, or if it does, it needs gentle supports that are sort of hidden from the audience. And these things can get quite complicated, but it is possible to sort of start to support and bring up some of those petals so that they're not sort of so collapsed. So you would have to sort of start to slowly tease them apart a little bit, but you're going to have to build little pillows underneath them that are hidden, but to help to sort of fill out the sculpture and perhaps show it a little bit like textiles end up being done, perhaps at a slant. I think it's possible. I mean, there's really is all of that layering of all of those petals there. There still is a lot of life there.
Absolutely.
And they just need to be brought together, and they'll start to rest upon each other, understanding that every time that you come in contact with a piece and you put another surface behind it, it starts to be influenced by that surface, particularly latex. Just like when she poured it, it took the texture, its matter on the bottom because of that plaster that was sucking away moisture, glossier on the top where there was no contact. When you bring something in behind it, it could start to influence it. But we have to remind ourselves it's the back of the piece.
Right.
And we're trying to let it see the light of day.
I would love that. My experience is that when you do hang them, when you take them out of off a flat surface, they do start to blossom, in different ways. And Hannah used thumbtacks, silver thumbtacks, that look similar to the other thing, the snaps, to press them into the board. And I don't know if you have any of those with the piece, but that's on all the work I've seen. There are thumbtacks. In fact, we had received a little envelope of thumbtacks with some of our pieces. And that's how she put them on the board.
Right, so even in her own lifetime, these things are going to react to gravity quite quickly. Yeah. And so she's also creating props in order to create a fold where you may not see it. But yeah, I know the kind of tacks you're talking about. They used
the old little silver thumbtack.
Yeah. Yeah, you can see them in a lot of the photos of her installing the work, or of the works installed, especially early on. You can make those out in the images. One of our audience members, Marina, hi Marina, who's also a curator, is asking whether there's ever been discussion of fabricating exhibition copies of Hannah's works, of making essentially a copy of it today that wouldn't circulate as a Hannah Wilke object, but that would be used only for purposes of exhibition. And I've definitely thought about what, if I were to show the work here, that I would want to try to make an exhibition copy to give people a sense of what did this look like? How would it have behaved back in 1974, which is quite different from what it would look like, laid out in a vitrine probably today. Has that ever come up in other instances, Marsie?
I don't know of any. I know that we've been contacted by a couple of different museums to make, if they wanted to make an exhibition copy of a part of a sculpture, base that a sculpture was on. That's the only, and of course we've made photographic copy for photographs, exhibition copies. But I don't know of any other instance, certainly not for the latex. It's an interesting thought. I'm not sure you can really accomplish it.
Yeah, I mean,
do you think you can? Do you have somebody who would do it? Or?
Well, I think I would have to work with an artist who uses liquid latex, of which I know a few actually. But that's something that I want to do as I think about expanding this project, is to actually do some studio visits with artists who work with this material now, because, working with the material, you get such a different understanding of what it's capable of than you do as just a curator. But I think, as Heather certainly knows, there have been experiments of this kind done with Eva Hesse's work. There was an exhibition copy made of Sans 2 and of another work of hers that was also made out of latex that had hardened in place and that really couldn't be revived. And the color in those, it had gone from like this beautiful translucent white to like an amber color. And so it actually really looked like a relic as opposed to, how it looked originally. And I think it's really interesting as a museum goer and a curator and a researcher to see those objects side by side. And I feel like a lot of scholarship attributes a kind of tragedy to these works based on how they look. And that's not at all how they looked back when they were made. And we could go on a whole long, discourse about women artists and the sort of biographical heaviness, especially artists who died before their prime, like Hesse and Wilke both, and how the scholarship on their work has been influenced by those aspects of their lives. But I think seeing an exhibition copy kind of forces you to stop and pause and say, oh, that's not what the work looked like at all.
Would you make it to scale, or I sort of was visualizing a small little model,
Yeah.
Rather than something, completely the same. But I just wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I mean, as you know, scale influences how you understand a work of art quite significantly. So I think in my ideal universe, we would construct, really a one-to-one scale exhibition copy, or, if we don't want to call it an exhibition copy, a kind of experimental artwork, to give people a sense of what that other thing might look like. But Heather, have you worked with exhibition copies at all in your capacities?
I've worked with making facsimiles of parts, not entire sculptures. When I was at the National Gallery, we were working with Rauschenberg's Minutia, which was his dance set for Merce Cunningham, and there was a silk banner that had been shattered and actually treated by Rauschenberg's studio in a sort of very conservation treatment where they had glued another support to it, but that shattered. So we did make a facsimile of that portion of it. And as far as I know, that facsimile still travels with Minutia. I think Minutia is now in the Guggenheim's collection. I should check that. And I know when you often see pictures of Minutia, the photo documentation represents the old silk banner, but the replica, as far as I know, still is with the piece, and the original is with Rauschenberg, his estate. So yeah, I have been involved in some of that stuff, and of course we refinished the surface of Solowitz's sculpture at the Allen in a way that was much more, one would say, invasive than often conservation approaches take. But it was towards that artist intent, which conservators are definitely very involved with, and it can be somewhat controversial. But yeah, so
that's
I think conservation is trying to expand out the realm of possibilities. So for pieces like this, it could be like that both and situation, which has happened with Eva Hesse, where you see a facsimile of Sans 2 and you see the original discolored one, or Expanded Expansion is the other one.
Yeah, thank you.
That they recreated. You know, there's a real learning process that they go through, and you know, Marsie's had the advantage of seeing these materials when they're full. When you use that language of fullness, we're missing that at moments, and so there is something of value to go through that experience again. And it's you know, it can be exciting and frustrating. And
I want to ask you, Heather, do you think if the Allen got working and hung it in the near future and just let it sit out in the air and breathe and settle and expand, do you think that would benefit the work before the actual exhibition that Andrea wants to put on?
well, certainly it would be interesting to see the way, I mean, COVID has now, Andrea and I both were talking beforehand, and COVID has prevented me from coming to visit the piece in person. Even though Andrea showed it to me through lots of videos. So it's great, the Zoom is great, but there are limitations. And I've shown you the Robert Rome piece. I would imagine, even in its sadness and in its flat state, that I bet you it has more strength than we give it credit for.
I think so. I think so.
So it would be interesting to see the way that gravity interacts with it, but I think you'd have to be ready to give it some additional support and some help.
Sure.
So when you were talking just now about artistic intention, Heather, you know, I think that was where I wanted to go next, in thinking about the way that both as a conservator and Marsie as the sort of steward of Hannah's legacy, the extent to which intention, at least as far as we can understand it, right? And as far as any artist can understand what their express intentions are, how much that concept influences the work that we're all trying to do in various capacities around objects like this. So I'm wondering, Heather, if you can, as we sort of move towards winding down, if you can say a little bit about how you gauge what artistic intention is as a conservator and how it informs your decision making. And then Marsie, I would love for you to answer what is a really big question about managing the legacy of an artist and of your sister in particular, in how you make decisions and what general principles guide your decision making around questions like the one that we're asking today.
So for me as a conservator, artistic intent, we do use that language a lot. There's a tremendous amount of discomfort at times in sort of recognizing an interpretive process that conservation is. And there really is an interpretation that goes on. And often as conservators, we perhaps over-rely or sort of cloak ourselves in this idea that science presents us with something that is quantifiable and understandable. And even though every scientist out there right now is rolling their eyes because they're the ones who really know how much unknown there is out there. But we're always looking towards the science to sort of give us some sort of objectivity. But in fact, there is a portion of my work that is involved in interpretation, and it's hard. You recognize the biography of the artist. I mean, just looking at pictures of Hannah with those pieces next to her, I'm sort of a voyeur at that moment. I'm watching something and I'm looking at something and I am getting really valuable information. It seems like valuable information to me about that fullness, about the way the piece moved and how she was next to it. There's a liveliness to it. It's really hard for me not to bring that into my own work. And I think as conservators, we're starting to acknowledge that more and more. Your own biography also affects how you work with things and how much you accept change. I think I accept more change at this stage of my career than I did when I was younger. And you can just talk to Eric about how upset I would get about certain condition issues, varnishes on Impressionist paintings. I know a lot of you know in the audience from my own biography, I'm a 2-year breast cancer survivor. I do you feel like the changes that I experience and have to look at, that I'm glad to be a conservator, because I think it has given me a sense of humor, a sense of understanding that change is inevitable. And if you don't accept it with some grace, it's really hard.
Yeah, well, anyone who knows you knows that you have an incredible sense of humor and a lot of grace. So thank you for that, Heather.
Gotta keep laughing or you'll cry.
Congratulations on your 2 years. I'm a 1 year.
Congrats to both of you.
Club. But it does, so Marsie, you've seen the alteration of artworks of people that you love. You know, there's still part of you that wants to see the pieces as they were.
Well,
but can you tolerate
not as they were, but in a form, whether changed or not, that Hannah would consider beautiful. Because that's what she always said. I love things that are beautiful. I want them to be beautiful. And that aesthetic sense, I think, should still present itself, even in a changed form.
And that's where there's still quite a bit of coloration, because she did so much pigmentation of the latex, the decay that you see in Eva Hess's work, which can seem very tragic. She still has that, the sense of a palette.
Yeah.
And it's the liveliness and sort of some of the form that can be reintroduced, and that probably can be done with some support and some careful thinking. It's curating a.
I can't wait to see you do it.
Don't forget to answer it.
Can you also say a little bit, Marsie, about just the general process of decision making around Hannah's work and what kinds of principles guide you, in the same way that Heather's articulated a little bit of what guides her?
Principle number 1, what would Hannah want? Principle number 2, did she just tell us? What did she say? No, really, there's and you know, we have our archives here, and we often do a lot of research around decision making, you know, to find out what happened where and when, and what was done. You know, it depends on the curators you're working with. Some curators really love our involvement, my son and I, and they, you know, ask us for information, and they come to the archive, and other curators seem to want to do it on their own and are not as open and inclusive. So I try to be sensitive to them, you know, as well. But I do have certain things that I feel are really important, like putting sculpture in vitrines, so you know they're protected. I try to frame Hannah's work the way she had framed it throughout her life, which was for the large works, especially without mats. What else do we do? You know, in terms of hanging the latex, I did talk a little bit with curators preparators at MoCA when Ponderosa was being hung there, and Michael Solway hung several of the pieces when he had a gallery in LA, and we had a conversation about it while it was happening. I'm just trying to think, you know, in terms of general principles, it's really about kind of understanding the individual unique work and what its requirements are, and how to communicate that with whoever's working with it. You know, once it's in someone's permanent collection or in a museum permanent collection, we don't have that opportunity as much. Although I've been contacted by certain museum people, for instance, about chocolate sculptures that Hannah made. That have decayed, and what we should do about it. So every now and then I love when people, you know, museum curators contact me and say, this is what's going on with the work. And I kind of wish the Allen had reached out to Hannah while she was alive, if they had known what was going on, and consulted her as it was done for Ponderosa. Yeah.
There is, oddly enough, a post-it in the curatorial file that must be from before Hannah died, because it says, you know, I forget the exact phrasing, but it says something like, you know, the work is in really bad shape. Should we contact the artist to try and do an exchange? And obviously that was never followed up on. And that, you know, I think it was also I saw this file really early in my time here, and I thought, you know, okay, if I can make any kinds of changes like these before artists pass away, before the decision-making process, you know, naturally is much more difficult, I should. Don't let it, you know, don't let these things linger.
Yeah, I think it's really important for museums to stay in touch with the artists while they're alive, you know, and just let them know how the work is proceeding, because so much work isn't on view. And, you know, unless the artist reaches out and says, how's my work? Exactly. You know, no one knows, and they lose an opportunity.
Andrea, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
As a curator, and knowing you, there's always from the outside, we're not privy to all of your communication and all the things that you need to do, but there is a sense, because so many institutions have within their mandate the preservation of artwork, there is a discomfort for a museum to display an artwork in less than perfect condition for fear that they will be accused of not caring for a work. And that's a hard burden, because they're often not responsible for the accelerated aging of latex. You know, we all sort of recognize that, but there is a tension. Does the public understand that? What are the conversations in the museum about doing that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In a different version of this essay early on, and then I wound up cutting this because it diverted me from the purpose of this particular project. But I really wanted to think about, why are museums so scared of showing objects that have aged, particularly when they're made of materials that just age? And, you know, what we typically see, what I'm sure we've all seen, are exhibitions about conservation, but they're triumphant, right? They're like, oh my goodness, we spent the last 5 years and all of these resources restoring Matisse's whatever. And, you know, they're about a success. They're not exhibitions about failure or about the impossibility of conservation. And part of what set me on the path to thinking a lot more about this latex work was that I kept racking my brain, like, when have I seen a museum really do this, like put out on view something that they know they can't fix, but that I think is still a really resonant object and one that deserves to be looked at. And there have been a few little examples here and there, and there have been, MoMA did an exhibition of work by Dieter Roth a few years ago, where they included some works that were in a state of decay, but then they also included this whole huge wall of a work that they had conserved, and, you know, we're celebrating the kind of restoration of this thing. So, you know, it was a bit of a give and take. But the conversation here, I mean, we'll see if we're able to make something happen eventually with this object at the Allen. I think the work needs a lot of context. You can't just stick this out in a vitrine and hope someone reads the label, because they really need to know that this is an object that doesn't look like how the artist intended back when it was made. And, you know, for most other objects on view, they're a lot closer to that original work than this one is. So the question for me as a curator is, what does the audience need to understand what they're looking at? And how can I do that in a way that is respectful to the artist in the best way possible? And with Hannah's work, you know, to me, it's about giving it all of the context that comes through in the paper that I read, you know, thinking about what justification do I have as a curator for doing this with her work, and that I'm finding that justification in her work, and not just because I feel like it, you know. So to me, it's a very specific object in that way, because I think it justifies its own exhibition. But I really do wish that the museum field in general would, because these objects are in every museum. Like, you know, I visited museums like MoMA, the Whitney, et cetera, when I was doing a Mellon-funded conservation workshop a few years ago. And even at really big institutions, they pull in, you know, the conservators were all too excited to pull out these objects because we were so fascinated and excited about them. Marina, who asked a question earlier, was also in that workshop with me. And, you know, they pulled out like plastic works by Naumgabo that have just disintegrated. Like literally all that's left is the support and then crumbs of the plastic that once was the work. And, you know, I mean, there's literally nothing that can be done there except for perhaps making an exhibition copy. But aside from this behind the scenes, very, very privileged look at those objects, the public doesn't get to see that. And it is a lot about the museum's fear that they're going to be seen as not taking care of their objects. Whereas I think that members of the public are really engaged by seeing art objects, as like things that have lives and lifespans, and understanding that about them in ways that, you know, usually they don't get to. So
and they would see the process of making, in a sense, as well as it's disintegrating, you know, the artist's process.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's just part of the lifespan of artworks like this that I think people would be really interested to see and to know more about, and rather than having them hidden from view, which is how it is most of the time. Thank you for that question, Heather. Are there any last thoughts that we have before we wrap up? I know we have taken up a lot of folks' time, but I have been personally really interested in our discussion. So I thank you both for being here. Are there any final thoughts?
Pleasure, and thank you for doing it, for resurrecting Hannah and her work. It's really a meaningful thing to me, and I'm glad it is for you, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me along. I was really touched by the paper, and I like this idea, and I would think failure should be not used as a descriptor, but acceptance.
Acceptance. Yes. I think that's a really good and positive note for us to end on, actually. So thank you both, and thanks to everyone who tuned in.
Thanks everyone, Jill and Elizabeth also.
Yeah, thank you everyone behind the scenes. And we will see you for the next Allen Online, I hope.
Bye.